This is episode number 155 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And this week, I'm going to be talking with fellow podcaster Justyn Myers, who runs Your 86, a great podcast for industry-focused content. Now, things may look a little bit different on the background here, and that's because we're in the middle of our move. So I've packed up a lot of my audio equipment, and as well as a back bar. This is actually a print we had made of our back bar that is now destroyed as we're relocating to a new place. So things might just be slightly different with this podcast, so my apologies in advance, but that shouldn't detract us from the great content and the great insights that Justyn is going to give to us during this podcast. So he's going to share with us some of the skills that he learned to launch this podcast, as well as some of the takeaways from some of the guests that he's interviewed. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm super excited. We have another special guest joining us for the podcast, Justyn Myers. So definitely appreciate you taking the time out to be on our podcast. How's it going, Justyn?
It's going great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll be honest, I love your podcast. He's a fellow podcaster, and I've been listening to it. Actually, I think I've listened to all the podcasts over the last couple of weeks. I kind of binge watched it or listened to them. So, but yeah, maybe you could tell us a little bit about kind of your experience behind the bar and what kind of got you started with your own podcast.
Yeah, so I actually studied journalism in college, but I graduated in 2009, which was a terrible time to graduate as a journalist because not only was the economy awful, but all of the newspapers and magazines were kind of being bought up by big conglomerates, and there was just thousands of journalists losing their job. So I started working at a hotel doing AV, hoping it would be somehow related. And then 2012, I was literally thrown behind the bar. I was doing a gallery, an art show kind of event. We had a little beer and wine bar, and the person that was supposed to run it didn't show up. So I jumped back there, and I loved it. I never done anything like that before, and I just, I love talking to everybody and recommending things and helping people out. So after that, I realized, maybe I could do this for a job. So I started out in catering and doing some other like art related pop-up events. And then probably, it was almost 5 years ago now, I got a job at the Interval here in San Francisco. Fort Mason. At the time it was ran by Jennifer Collio, who was one of my greatest mentors. She's amazing. So I worked there for about 3.5, 4 years and just learned a ton. But I started to feel a little bit burnt out just working behind the bar with that kind of daily grind. So I had the opportunity to travel in Europe, took some time off, and started this podcast. In that break, now I'm actually back at the Interval a little bit, but doing more menu development, spirit selection, things like that. You can still find me behind the bar there.
Sure.
I work at High Treason, which is a wine bar here in the Inner Richmond neighborhood, and I'm developing the low ABV cocktail program for them.
Cool.
But yeah, I just realized that probably can't work behind the bar forever. It was just taking a toll on me physically, emotionally, and so I started thinking, what do I do next? And so I kind of combined all the things that I had learned, all my experience with all the different directions I went in, and learned about podcasting, and thought, well, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could make some, money doing that or something. Then I started thinking about it more, and I realized our industry is an industry that doesn't get a lot of help.
Yeah.
We're always the ones helping everybody else, and we're not really taken care of. And there's a lot of issues in our industry that people don't talk about. So I thought, and really, I wanted to know how to do these things better. Even simple things like cutting someone off or or 86ing someone, or I just couldn't find a lot of good information about how to do that. And then I'd ask people with more experience, and they would, I typically get the answer, which was, well, that's just life. You just gotta get more experience, more experience. I'm like,
which is a terrible answer, right?
I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, okay, well, that's true. I understand that that's true, but that doesn't really help me on Friday night when I had to kick this drunk dude out.
Right.
Like, what do I do then? So I thought, well, lots of people have done this kind of stuff, and maybe I should just talk to a lot of people and get their stories and put them out there for our community to hear. And maybe if we get enough of these things in our head, we can, when we're like caught in that situation, we can think, oh, I heard this on Your 86 or this some other podcast or whatever, maybe I'll try this. And I just hope more people hear these stories and get these things in our heads, and then hope to make the industry better for everybody.
Yeah, and I think, so before we get too far, the name of your podcast is Your 86, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, Your 86, which is, of course, the term for, typically we use it when we run out of something, like, 86 lemon juice, or but also when you kick someone out of the bar, they are 86'd as well. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of just a typical term that a lot of bartenders know. It's a term that means a problem, and I kind of wanted to sum it all up with something catchy like that.
Yeah, and it's a very industry-focused term, so if you're outside of the industry, you may not know what that means unless it has happened to you.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, once again, that secret handshake. You're part of the club, you know what you're talking about, so this podcast will probably apply to you if you get the language.
It is a very industry-focused podcast, and that's sort of the audience that I'm directing it to. Although I've had a lot of people tell me, like, "Wow, it's so interesting to hear what bartenders have to deal with." I'm not a bartender, but yeah, I'm definitely, the goal of it is to help other bartenders. So it's definitely aimed at other bartenders.
Yeah, and like I said, I've been kind of binge listening to it, and the one thing that I love about your podcast is how candid everyone is. How kind of vulnerable your guests are, and in sharing kind of an accurate portrayal of what it's like in their shoes in these circumstances. And there's some pretty tough subject matters that you've tackled on the podcast. And just for somebody to be open to have these conversations with a much larger audience than just a one-on-one, that's the thing that I really enjoy. And I have a lot of respect for kind of what you guys are doing over there. So I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a real challenge, actually. It's something I've had to learn, is like how to get people to talk about these things. Because they're things that we need to talk about. I did an episode about how to deal with like date rape situations at your bar. Like, what do you do when you can tell someone is drugged, or when you see someone doing that? And that's not a nice thing to talk about, And that was actually a really hard episode for me to record, and for my guests to talk about. And my most recent episode was about alcohol use at the bar. And so I talked to Mark Goodwin, who started the PIN project, which is a little pin you can wear to let your coworkers know that you're not drinking that day. And just he was very candid about his struggle with drinking too much at the bar. And it's kind of hard to get into these conversations. And I actually end up cutting a lot of the beginning of my interviews, because we just kind of have casual conversation for a while until I feel that people are comfortable.
Right.
And then I really start to jump into the core of the content or the subject matter that I want to do for that episode. But yeah, I ended up cutting a lot of that stuff out, because it's just, no one wants to hear that. It's not the point for the listener. It's the point is to like make my guests feel comfortable. And then they kind of forget that there's a microphone in front of them, and it ends up being a better interview, better sounding interview, and gets the point across, and gets the message, that we're trying to find.
Yeah, and like I said, I really have been enjoying the podcast, I really appreciate you taking the time to be out here and being on our podcast. So you talked about kind of like transitioning from bartender to look forward to see maybe this is something that you want to do a little bit more long term. So when you kind of went through that process, what are some of the skill sets that you kind of needed to develop? I know you said you were a journalism major, so you probably had a lot of that background skill set already kind of in place from your education. But was there anything in particular that you had to develop kind of to start launching your podcast?
Well, I thought that I might have a lot of that background because of my education, but I remember actually in my commencement speech when I graduated, one of my professors, and he was a great professor, but basically the gist of his speech was, we were all print media people, and we taught you everything we knew, and now print media is very rapidly dying, and we didn't tell you anything about the internet, so good luck.
Oh, wow.
So that was a little discouraging. And as you know, podcasting is a very new medium, relatively new medium, and there's a lot of great resources out there for learning podcasting, but people are still kind of in a trial and error period. It's not like radio or news media. It's kind of a new thing. People are experimenting and trying it out, and that's actually one of the things I really like about it. Is you can kind of find your own voice, kind of do whatever you want. There's definitely things that work and don't work. In terms of what I had to learn is, I've never done this before. This is my first time doing a podcast, and so kind of, I'd conducted interviews before, but not for audio. So that's been a learning curve. I learned a lot about how I sound. Some of the first interviews I recorded, I noticed that I give a lot of acknowledgement, like, oh yeah, oh yeah, which sounds like garbage. If there's too much of that on the recording, so I had to, I had little notes for a while that said like, shut up when you're recording, just to tell myself like,
yeah, that's something I still struggle with. I'll be completely honest.
Me too. Absolutely.
Because it's when like natural human communication, you want to be there and like give feedback and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I know
totally makes sense when you're having a conversation at the bar or something, but it's that, the microphone, you can't really hide much on the microphone. So,
absolutely.
But yeah, I learned, and then so audio is sort of more of a real-time medium. You can only edit so much, I think, and so you kind of have to be like going, and it's sometimes like I'm not in a good mood, but I have to sound good on the microphone. So it's like I've had to learn how to be a good host, like whatever is going on. It's similar to working in a bar. You gotta greet your guests and be happy, even though like your life could be imploding. You just gotta get through your shift and leave that stuff at the door. Same thing when I press record, and kind of learning how to pull stories out of people and shape them into something meaningful. Yeah. In a way that conveys knowledge in this medium of podcasting and audio. So, my episodes each have a different topic that I focus on. And, I know that, and I select a guest because I know they've had experience with that. And I know that they have a story in there. It's kind of like getting that story out and getting it into the recording in a way that's going to sound good for my listeners and convey the meaning. Like that's a really hard thing to do. I'm definitely not good at it yet, but I think it just takes practice. And every episode I learn something new. And then sometimes I go into an interview and I think that I know what the story is. And I quickly find that, well, there's a lot more here, and I'm totally not prepared to talk about this. The episode I mentioned with Nate Olson, where I wanted to do an episode about date rape drugs and stuff. It's like that's what I thought I was going into, but then I sort of found out halfway through that he had dealt with this basically like a riot situation outside of his bar. He was managing Make Westing in Oakland, and I don't even remember last summer there was a big riot related to the Nia Wilson murder that happened just at his doorstep, and there was cop cars and everything. So then he's telling this story, and I'm like, oh, I didn't read the news about this. Like,
Yeah.
I was like not prepared at all to talk about that, but so I had to kind of get through that and figure out what was important about that story and on the fly. And that I'm definitely not good at yet. So
Right. Yeah. What's funny is my experience, I had not pertaining to this particular area, subject, but I remember those riots. My wife and I were walking through Oakland. We were actually at Umami Mart.
oh yeah.
Barware. And we start looking around and there's cops everywhere. And we're like, huh, we're pretty naive when it comes to this stuff. We're like, hey, what's going on, guys? And this lady's like right next to her. She looks at us. She goes, you know what? You guys should probably get going. This is like a riot. So we're like, oh, thanks. Just completely out of our element.
Yeah.
But she was super kind and like, yeah, you should probably go. We're like, all right.
Yeah. Yeah, all that basically showed up on the doorstep of their bar. And
it was insane. Like it just like somebody flipped a switch is what it seemed like it happened. But yeah, like to your point though, when you're going through these audio recordings and interviews, things start coming up left and right, and you do a great job of kind of managing the conversation and it's still kind of keeping people on topic. It's something I obviously struggle with and have always struggled with, just because there's so many fascinating things that can come up in an interview. Your mentor, I actually interviewed Jennifer Kallio, and it was fascinating. She's such a wealth of knowledge. I mean, you can talk about almost any topic with her, and she is very well versed in the topic. And that has, even to this day, has been the longest podcast I've ever had. It was
I believe
2.5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was just like us kind of feeding off each other about all these topics and frustrations we have in the industry and all these things. But like I said, she just had so much great knowledge and experience and insights that I was like, all right, let's go. Well, people want to listen to it, they'll listen to it. If not, well, maybe they'll find something else. So, but yeah, definitely can relate to that for sure. So
that's great.
When you interview these people, I think you have, last I checked, 12 podcasts.
I think there's 12 interviews, something like that, and then some. About every 5th episode, I kind of do like a summary, like quick tips kind of thing, because there's so much information in the interviews that I try to like pull out some little bits and then put it together. So you can they're like sort of like episode 4.5 is there maybe like 10 minutes, 8 or 10 minutes long. So you can if you just want to get some quick knowledge, you can listen to those. So yeah, about 12 or 13 interviews now, something like that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, distilling all this information and getting all these different perspectives, have there been any kind of real standout interviews for you that you really loved, and some of the kind of the big juicy takeaways that you've had from some of those interviews? I know that's kind of a loaded question.
Oh, no. I mean, the cool thing about being a bartender and doing a podcast about bartending is I get to learn a lot myself. It's like this podcast is for me as much as it is for the other people in my industry. So I interviewed Andrew Meltzer. He currently runs the beverage program at Noosh. It's a new restaurant in the Fillmore. And we talked about cutting people off, which was always one of the things that I hated the most about bartending. And it's something that happens a lot. Depending on which bar you work at, it can happen like nightly, But I always thought of it as like, oh, this is terrible. I don't want to deal with this thing. It's I just hope it, just hoping that it wouldn't happen. But after interviewing him, and his perspective is, well, this is just part of the job, in the same way that, taking out the compost bin is part of the job. And he sort of reframed it as an opportunity to provide good service to someone. Sometimes somebody needs a cocktail. Sometimes somebody needs a nice glass of wine. Sometimes they need you to help them, choose what to drink. And sometimes people need to help you tell them not to drink, or that they're done for the night. and how do you go about doing that? Because there's so many factors. You got to think about the psychology of people and psychology of a drunk person, and but I actually feel really good about cutting people off now, and I'm happy to, if it happens at my bars. Now I'm like, oh, let me take care of that, because I actually kind of like it now, because it's an opportunity to make someone happy and provide really good service to someone, and you can, and if you're just prepared for that, it's not a big issue. You just have a plan, you have something to offer them instead, and you make them feel welcome, like, hey, look, you don't have to go, but it's just, this is what's going on, and I can't serve you anymore, but I have all these other great things, and here, like, try this. This one's on me. It's our, non-alcoholic, whatever spritzer with, our house infused nonsense in it, like whatever. It's like not a big thing. And then, like, they're actually probably going to feel really good. Like, oh, wow, I wanted a drink, but this guy's real nice, and he gave me this cool thing, and I'm probably going to feel a lot better in the morning. It goes from being this thing of like, no, get the hell out, you can't drink anymore,
right,
to being like another way that you're taking care of people.
Sure, I really like that that kind of shift in mentality as well. Because a lot of the times when I've had to cut people off, I immediately find myself in a very combative environment. Because their pride takes a bit of a hit, like, immediately, and all of a sudden, this situation that was manageable, it starts to escalate pretty quickly. And to your point, not a lot of people have training in this, unless you're just exposed to it a lot. Then unfortunately you have plenty of training and opportunities to figure this out. So I really like how you kind of shift the mentality or a little bit around and say, all right, guys, we're not going to go down that road. Instead, let's find something else that's going to work, and try to find something that works in a framework of customer service and the experience, not only for that one particular guest, but for everybody as well. Because I know as a bartender, I wouldn't want to be put in that position as well. Once they get excited, then I start to reflect that a little bit, or have in the past. So definitely like that approach for sure.
Yeah. I did another episode about injuries, basic injuries at the bar, where I had my friend who's a nurse come on, and it's actually the only episode so far I've had two guests. We had Julie Coons, who's a colleague of mine that's probably the most injured bartender I know.
Oh, no.
Talk about all of her ridiculous injuries she's sustained while working. And then my friend Andrew told us, like, oh, this is what you do. And I actually, maybe like a week or so after I released that episode, my coworker at High Treason cut her, like a glass broke, she cut her finger.
Right.
And because I just recorded that episode, I was like, I know exactly what to do, and it was fine. She was fine, and it was, it wasn't a serious cut, but it could have got worse, could have infected or whatever. But I was like, yeah, I know what to do. I just learned about this and in that episode.
I got this. No worries. Everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah. So I hope, especially for things like that are just real, kind of objective, like, oh, when this happens, do this kind of things. Those can be immediately helpful. But yeah, I hope the show helps other bartenders as much as it's helped me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I've really enjoyed them. And the one I really want to kind of just talk about a little bit, if you're okay with it, is the one you just released, the alcohol one.
Absolutely.
Because it really kind of captures the lifestyle of a bartender, and kind of what we get caught up in, and how easy it is to kind of go down a very direct route of overconsumption and kind of the normalization of alcohol. So would you mind kind of like just kind of talking about that and who the guest was and some of the takeaways from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed doing that episode. So I had Mark Goodwin on the show, and he started at Trick Dog here in San Francisco, which is a very happening bar, very very industry bar, kind of the center of the universe for the modern cocktail movement. And like many of us working at these places, we like we're he had a good quote that we're kind of like the life of the party, but for most of our guests, that's like 1 or 2 nights a week. For us, that's 5 or more nights a week, and it's like how sustainable is that? It's like you can deal with being hungover once a week, but it's like, and maybe that's a Friday or Saturday morning when you're hungover and you don't have to go to work and you can sleep it off. But for us, it's like we got to get up and do that all over again. And then and when we're in an environment that is surrounded by alcohol, that's typically free or cheap, everyone's around us is drinking. It's like it's really easy to get caught up in that. I mentioned that if I worked at a cupcake bakery, that I would probably eat a lot of cupcakes. That would have its own issues, but
right.
Yeah, I see it a lot, and it's not. We talked a lot about how it's not because the industry is bad or the liquor industry is bad, but it's just we need to find a little bit more balance, and that's hard to do. There's so many factors. There's peer pressure, and there's brands coming at you, and and then our own excitement of like I took a trip to Mexico and got to work in a Tahona mill and harvest agave, and then I came back just like obsessed with tequila and want to drink it all the time and talk about it all the time, and because we're excited, we're fascinated by these things, but when we're surrounded by this and when all the time every day, it just takes a toll on us. So that was kind of the gist of the episode, and well, so he actually hasn't drank in 11 months now.
Oh wow!
And that's just what he needed. And he's not one that's like preaches sobriety or anything. But he that was actually one of the cool things about the episode, is because a lot of times you hear this rhetoric of like, no, it's bad and you need to stop and it's just evil. But he's like, no, it's great. Like drinking's great, alcohol's great. It's just not for me right now. Like it's not like I can't do that right now personally, but you all have fun, and that's really what this pin is about that he created. It's a little pin that you wear, and it just silently tells everyone that like, hey, I'm not drinking right now. While I'm wearing this pin, I'm not drinking. So like, don't offer me a shot, and we don't have to talk about it. But yeah, you want to do a shot, good. Like knock yourself out, knock them back. But
right.
Yeah, so that was a really, and it's really a big thing. I think that I actually had left the interval for about 10 months for a number of reasons. But one of them was I was just not feeling healthy.
Right.
Not feeling healthy, working that many hours, working that schedule. And, I would have like my glass of soda water in my well. And, if it was busy, like Friday night when we're just dealing with all these people that, often can be rude, and, it's just, I pour this little soda water in there and I just grab that bottle of Tapatio, top it off with a little tequila, and that's just, I don't know how much I was drinking every night. And that I just had to take a break and sort of reevaluate. And that's actually what he recommends, is like, well, just like stop for a while and see what it really means to you. And, I love drinking. I love alcohol. I'm fascinated by it. And sometimes I take a break,
Yeah. And
for a month or a couple weeks, a couple times a year, I just have to stop and be like, okay, what is it about this that I like? Am I just getting into a pattern? And, I always go back and I feel a little more balanced and understand like, oh, I really like wine. I'm fascinated by it. And that's why I like to drink it, because I want to learn and I want to share. But, sometimes I feel like I don't want to drink. And now I know the pin, and then talking about this makes it easier to say like, yeah, no, I'm okay. Just leave one in for me tonight, you know?
Right, absolutely. And I think this is probably a something that a lot of bartenders get caught up in, and we kind of talked a little bit about that earlier. But it's very easy to say, you know what, I'm not going to go in. I'm not going to drink today. But then once you get caught up in that moment and you start to fall in those patterns again, it's
Yeah.
easy to kind of just let go of that and reevaluate the next day or not, and just kind of continue the cycle. So I really appreciated that. And like I said, his viewpoint on alcohol in general was very positive.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, he wasn't saying anything negative about it. He fully embraces it. He fully, supports it, as long as it was part of a healthy lifestyle, I think is what his main takeaway was with that.
Yeah, it's just got to work for you. And we have to be honest with ourselves. And sometimes that means taking a step back to really find out, what this means to us and on a deeper level,
Right. Absolutely. And I know a lot of bartenders, myself included, would do like Sobertober or Dry January and stuff like that. And, it was the first time I heard it, I was like, all right, I'm kind of skeptical. I'm not sure what is entailed with that. But the more I started to understand it, and I'm like, okay, this is just a healthy choice. It's good to kind of pump the brakes a little bit, analyze kind of why we're drinking, for one thing, and kind of what we're getting out of that, and making a better choice out of it. And, if you decide you want to start drinking again, great. If not, then let's do it all over again, and all that stuff. But, yeah, it was a really great episode. I really liked the messaging that you guys had and the viewpoints that you had on that one.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, yeah, absolutely. So anything you're kind of working on at the moment, that you're excited about, any future podcasts, that you're excited about kind of launching? Or subject episodes, I should say.
Yeah, I've got all these ideas. There's just so many things to talk about, and then often when I do these interviews, it just leads down a rabbit hole of even more things. I've got one of the things I've learned is that bartenders are really hard to get to follow up. Like, I feel like some of them don't even have email. Like, come on, guys. So I usually reach out to 6 people in a week, and then maybe one of them will come through and I'll get to interview them. I know we're busy. But I've got a whole bunch of topics that I want to do.
Great.
I'm hoping to interview someone that started bartending, later in life, that has I want to do a show about what is bartending like when you have a family, because your bar hours are not your kids' hours, as I'm sure you know. So that's something I want to get into. Mental health is a big issue in our industry right now. I was just at a talk on Monday about anxiety, sort of in the context of the industry. So that's another thing that I want to talk more about. So yeah, that's it's coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll do an event pretty soon. So,
that's cool.
We can get everyone together. Just kind of a casual thing. I don't have any details on that yet, but it's something to look forward to. Just hang out, meet people, talk about these things. Because I think we need to keep these conversations going if we're going to get better, And that I think our industry is at such a high level now. The stuff we're doing with cocktails and wine and food, and these bars are just beautiful that are opening, and the programs are beautiful, and they're so creative and intelligent. We've got ice programs. It's like 20 years ago we didn't have ice programs. We just had the same hotel ice machine. And so I think if we're going to operate at this high of a level, we can't keep living the lifestyle that we did, so many years ago, where we were just pouring shots and beers. And maybe you can handle that if you're not really thinking too much about this stuff. But
Right.
not that there's anything wrong with shots and beers or that style of place, but I think if we it takes so much work just to order product for some of these high-end kaiwaks, and we got to start talking about these other things, these things that are really hard to deal with, because it's all part of it. It's all part of service. It's all part of why we're there, and the problems aren't going to go away. Like even simple things like I just did an episode about dealing with annoying customers, and I said, no matter how much you change your bathroom signage, people are still not going to be able to find it, and they're still going to ask you about it, and that's really annoying, But like, where is it annoying? Like, is the outside isn't going to change, but we got to change on the inside,
right?
Now,
go ahead, keep going.
Oh, and I was just going to say that I hope things like my podcast and your podcast and what Mark's doing and what all these folks are doing is going to help change that to take us further in this industry and help us, stay at the high level that we're all at right now.
Yeah, and I wonder, this is something I was wondering earlier today, was as we look at bartending as an industry, craft cocktails are kind of still a pretty small portion of that, that overall pie out there. But I wonder, is craft bartending as a general idea, is it more introspective? Is it more cultural? Is it, what I'm trying to say is like, are we trying to change a lot of things, or are we learning along the way differently than like a nightclub bartender, for example? Because there's a lot of cultural elements that I find in craft bartending, but I don't know a lot about the other styles of bartending. So I wonder if that's, a byproduct of all the care we're taking in the cocktails, all the care we're taking with all these programs, and then a shift into, okay, now instead of like focusing primarily 100% on guests and volume and all that stuff, maybe we start looking at our own employees and retention and progression and opportunities and all that stuff. I don't know. I would just kind of brainstorming that earlier today. And kind of wanted, what do you think about that just in general? I know it's kind of a random question.
No, I think it's definitely something that we have to start thinking about.
Right.
I think the most important thing, and I keep saying this, the most important thing is like to really remember why we're here and why we're doing this. For me, I love, that first time I was behind the bar at the art event, I realized, we were just serving, like some cab from Safeway and like Lagunitas IPA. I think that's all I had. So, it was like, for me, it's like, it doesn't matter what I'm putting in the glass. It's the act of doing that and serving it to people that I think is important. And, I love spirits. I love cocktails. I love wine. I love all these things. I love learning about where they all come from and learning about, the biodynamic farming techniques that they use to make wine in Galicia or something. Like just, that's kind of stuff I'm interested in. But my guest doesn't, if I start talking about to my guests, that half the time their eyes glaze over and they're like, what? Do you have a Sauv Blanc? And that's fine. Like they don't need to know that. But the reason why I care about this stuff is so I can give a better experience to my guests.
Right.
In that I'm giving them the best drink that I can. And I think these other issues in our industry of staffing and handling these challenging situations are just another aspect of providing good service. If someone that is kind of out of their mind and maybe homeless wanders into your bar and starts screaming, you got to think of that as an opportunity for service. It's like, okay, that's a person too that has some, and also your other customers need to not hear this person screaming in your bar because that's not appropriate. And so you can think of that as like, well, how do I serve people here? How do I provide good service in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Or when you're you have problems with employees or injuries or any of these other things, it's like this is all part of operating our bars, and it's something that we need to think about as much as what is the best mezcal for this cocktail, or what is the farming practices of this product or whatever. It's like these are the things that are as important as everything else, and I think they're true no matter what kind of bar you work at. And I think a craft cocktail bar is very different than a nightclub. There's different aspects of that, but I think all of these things are kind of coming together. I think we had places where it was just like all volume as fast as we can, and we are gonna sacrifice everything else just to get as much product out as physically possible. And then we have the other end of the spectrum, maybe the craft scene 15 years ago, where it took 20 minutes to get a drink and some guy with a mustache and an attitude gave it to you. But it's like there's aspects of all these things that are good, and I think we're going to start to see like, oh wait, we can do high volume, but the quality can be really good, and we can do like really amazing, like bespoke cocktails, but the service can be great and they can be fast. We can work at these bars and have fun, but not feel like garbage every morning when we wake up. So I think everything is a little extreme, and we're starting to come more towards a place of balance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's kind of my long-term hope for the industry as well, is that, it doesn't take as significant a physical toll and emotional and toll as well. Because as we both know, and anybody listening to this podcast that's in the industry knows, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And if you're married or in a relationship, that adds a whole nother complexity to your scenario. If you have kids, like you're talking about, adds significant challenges also. And life is just, is going to throw you stuff. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think the more support and more conversations we can have around some of these harder subjects, the more options we have available to us and the better decisions we can make on our own personal level. I think that's something I'm keeping my fingers crossed with as well. So where can people find your podcast? What's the best way to kind of find your podcast?
You can find it anywhere podcasts are found, or audio podcasts anyway. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. If whatever podcast player you use, you should be able to find it. Or you're86.com, YOURE86.com. And yeah, it's out there. It's a weekly show, and we have new conversations every week with different bartenders, or I just talk at you about my own experience. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of stuff coming up.
Awesome. And then if anybody wants to reach out to you, let's say they want to be on your podcast or have specific questions on some of the topics that you've covered, what's the best way? Do you have an email or social media platform that you prefer?
Through the website is good. There's a contact form on there. That's probably the easiest way. I'm fairly active on Instagram at you're86. I feel like there's a lot of bartenders on Instagram. It's mostly because cocktails are pretty and they make good pictures. But yeah, if you want to get a hold of me, there's a form on the website. You can reach out, and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have a topic you want to hear about, if you want to talk about that topic, get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much again, Justyn, for your time. And we'll include all the links and social media platforms and email addresses in the show notes. So definitely check them out over at mixologytalk.com. So once again, thanks, Justyn, and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
So thanks again to Justyn Myers for sharing his experience and his time with us. Definitely go check out his podcast, You're 86. Like I said, I've been listening to it and I'm really enjoying the content there. So we'll have a link to all the things we discussed in the show notes over at mixology.com, right? mixologytalk.com/155. And we'll provide all those links. Evidently, I can't talk today. But anyways, if you want to connect with other industry professionals, ask advice, give advice, definitely check out our Facebook group, the Craft Bartender Facebook group. So go to mixologytalk.com and we will have links to that group there. So we'll have some more podcasts for you in the future. And until then, have a great shift and cheers.